So we would, yeah.
Hi, welcome back. Welcome back to our session. Now we will explore the details of the European strategy on artificial intelligence and try to assess whether it can give the bloc a competitive advantage. So we have no less than 11 panelists with us this morning, 7 of them online and 4 of them, as you can see, in real life. So this panel is especially timely because the Commission's consultation on the white paper just ended, and the European Parliament voted this week on 3 different reports on artificial intelligence. So we have with us roughly a third of people representing industry, 1/3 from civil society, and 1/3 policymakers. But before we hear from all of them, I would like to invite you to reply to our poll. So the question you're all invited to reply to is, what should be Europe's highest priorities for AI policy? 1, fair access to the data ecosystem for SMEs and startups. 2, talent training and support for R&D. 3, assuring privacy is protected for both corporate and government use of AI. And 4, strong rules for civil liability in case of harm. So before we start all this discussing, there's one general question that I will invite all of you to reply to one by one. Please, only in 2 minutes. So the first question that I have for you is, it's a general question just to kickstart the conversation. Will the EU strategy for AI, as laid down in the recent white paper, help Europe compete in the global race for artificial intelligence, or will it do the opposite? So we'll hear first from Cedric Archambault, who's principal applied scientist for machine learning at Amazon. Cedric, back to you.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. So I work on cloud services and enable practitioners, non-experts, developers to leverage AI in their application, for example, to automate decision-making, and also to deploy solutions at scale. And at the same time, I'm also close to the academic community. I, for example, co-teach an advanced course in machine learning at the University of Oxford. And so I think a large fraction of the fathers of modern machine learning and deep learning originated in Europe. And I think the research community in Europe did fundamental work here, enabled, among others, the AI revolution. And I think Europe has still tons of talent and expertise in the field, but it's somewhat fragmented. And so I think we believe that supporting general education initiatives for AI and citizens, professionals, academics is crucial for the AI adoption and the safe use. And we, for example, have several programs that we started to help with that. We have an Amazon Research Award to support academics in Europe and across the globe. We have an AWS Educate program to provide credits for compute and storage and help in teaching activities. And we have an Amazon Scholars program to enable academics to join part-time, either Amazon or Amazon Web Services, to work on tough problems, working backwards from the customers. But not having them to jump to industry, but they can be part-time, spend time in industry, and continue the teaching and research activity independently. So we welcome initiatives such, for example, as at ELIS, that aim to, better connect the brightest man in Europe in the field of AI, retain talent, remain competitive on the job market, and establish Europe as a European brand for ML and research and AI research. But we also think that any investment plan and future regulatory framework for AI should keep as a guiding principle the objective of accelerating and facilitating the development and use of AI. I think we're still in early days, and we believe that the uptake of AI will mostly depend on the use of AI supporting technologies that cloud computing capabilities can offer. For example, if you train a deep neural network, well, it's punctual in time, but it is very resource hungry. And so the cloud is a perfect setup for training those. I also think that public and private organizations need to be able to have easy access to a huge range of ready-to-use AI services, helping them, for example, to develop, train, and deploy their AI systems in order to meet their needs in an efficient and cost-effective way. And so we have broad offering of vertical services, ranging from text-to-speech solutions, translation tools, natural language processing tools that people and developers can use in their applications and build intelligent applications and leverage the technology. So in conclusion, I think that AI is not unique in the potential to endanger safety or breach fundamental rights, especially if misused. And the distinction should be made between actual risks that are inherent to the use of an AI system versus risks that apply to all technology, or risks related to intentional misuse of any technology. So it's really important to account for the benefits of using AI in this consideration and to foster innovation.
Okay, thank you. We also have Honorary Clayton Bartolo, who's Parliamentary Secretary for Financial Services and Digital Economy in the Government of Malta. Back to you.
Good morning, fellow European colleagues, experts in artificial intelligence, representatives on industry, and also ladies and gentlemen. It is truly an honor to be here addressing such a prestigious summit as this AI POLITICO summit. Bill Gates once said that we are changing the world with technology, and to be perfectly honest, I cannot agree more with such a statement. We are living in a world whereby we are experiencing new and emerging technologies, and it is also in our best interest to reap the full benefits and opportunities that such means of technology have to offer to us. I do believe that being a key enabler of this technology puts us ahead of the curve and also consolidates our competitive advantage. In fact, Malta was amongst the first jurisdictions to recognize, implement, and roll out a fully fledged AI strategy through an active consultation process with key stakeholders. It has always been Malta's interest to embark on new and innovative technologies, such as AI, in order to help ameliorate and complement both the government and the private sector's operations. In fact, this goes to show that the government has a key role to execute by becoming the first and main enabler of such technologies. As a matter of fact, in Malta, exactly in late 2018, the government was among the first to recognize the full potential that AI has to offer. And in this regard, we launched Malta's first AI task force. This eventually led to the drafting of Malta's AI strategy. And the strategy was built on two key pillars: the use and the application of AI in both the public and the private sectors. In total, it includes 70 action plans, which cater for all aspects of life. And these include investment, startups, the public and private sector adoption, education and workforce, and we do give a lot of importance to education, the legal and ethical framework, and also the whole ecosystem infrastructure. And as I have mentioned, we do give a lot of importance to education, and so in collaboration with the University of Malta and other educational institutions, the government is also pushing and promoting more initiatives aimed at fostering a stronger human capital workforce in terms of AI. And in this respect, we have also launched an AI scholarship together with the University of Malta. Moreover, the government has always secured a budget to implement and roll out a number of public sector AI projects, which include, for example, AI in tourism, AI in transport, and also, once again, AI in education, among others. And in order to help to further improve the local ecosystem, we have launched a new entity called the Malta Digital Innovation Authority, which entity is used to certify such new technology. In light of all of this, we are looking to become the ultimate AI launchpad, while working to also be a digital leader. We do aspire to be Europe's AI bastion for local and foreign companies and entrepreneurs who want to develop, prototype, test, and scale AI within our shores. Ultimately, we want to foster AI as part of a Maltese digital society that we are building for the years to come. Most of all, Malta is open for business, and I do invite you all to be a part of our project.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor now to Eline Chivot. You're a senior policy analyst at the Center for Data Innovation. So what's your take on Europe's AI strategy?
Thank you, Laura, and hello to my fellow panelists and the audience. Obviously, we've heard right before Cornelius say that we are not winning the AI race. Who will win it still is a sort of to be continued story, although it's pretty much China and the US racing ahead. Meanwhile, what we're busy with in Brussels is, this global AI race has sparked a conversation about regulating AI. It's a race to AI regulation because Brussels says the winner of the AI race will be the one that writes its rules. So we're racing ahead with the idea to create those rules, but we're doing so with handcuffs because concretely the way the proposal stands now, and there are a few things that are problematic and could discourage firms to pursue AI. To name a few, it would propose unrealistic, impractical, and irrelevant requirements on AI systems based on ethical principles that cannot always be translated well in practice. It would expand liability on developers and producers of the technologies while current rules are fit for purpose. And the proposal to impose conformity control mechanisms to test AI would be onerous and counterproductive, and limiting the use of some AI applications will in turn limit our ability to improve those systems that will be ceding the market to our competitors. The EU should rather encourage the continued development and training of AI systems based on voluntary industry-led practices and dialogue with industry to understand what's happening in practice, and only consider new regulations in high-risk scenarios when there's clear evidence of consumer harm. We should also consider amending some of the unnecessary restrictions that already cover some AI systems and focus on data quality and try not to see tech as a cost, but rather as an investment. Finally, we risk wasting our efforts if we sideline other priorities, such as addressing the lack of interoperability and common standards for better data sharing. The much-needed adoption of AI by our businesses, 42% only, compared to 85% in China. We need to address the transformation of the labor market, the lack of human capital supply. Our PhDs, when we train them, they do not stay. And also we have an issue with the lack of digital literacy. And very final word, we should focus on maybe broadening to our partners and allies and like-minded democracies, seek alliances with them if we want our values and principles to supersede China's in the global race. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have here with us Dr. Kathleen Gabriels. You're assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy, Faculty of Arts and Social Science at the Maastricht University. So what's your take on all of this?
So yes, thank you for inviting me. And I indeed have a background in academics, and I'm a moral philosopher. So for me, the key for responsible AI lies in interdisciplinarity, with a special role for ethics, of course. First in design, second in regulation, and third in research and education. And I'm happy that some of the other panelists have also hinted at education, because that's an aspect that I've been missing at the summit so far. So first, a good example of design is the close collaboration between ethicists and designers, where ethicists are involved in decision-making processes even before a prototype has been developed. And I think a good recent example is the development of the Corona app in the Netherlands, which was under supervision of a team of ethicists. Of course, this is also a plea for ethics by design, which is truly interdisciplinary as well, where values such as privacy are protected in the design by building them into it as a default setting. And I think it's really important on all levels that different disciplines are able to meet and talk. And also in order to understand one another's language. For instance, I teach to data scientists, and I have a background in the humanities, and we can have a different language. A data scientist sometimes thinks in a binary way, whereas ethics is messy. It's not a decision tree. Very often you have to make a trade-off between safety and privacy, for instance. And then secondly, regulation. So of course, diversity and interdisciplinarity are important also to hear voices of different groups and underrepresented groups in society. But this is also important for regulation. And a pitfall there is that very few policymakers have a technical background. So it's also really important to have these meetings with one another. And then finally, education, because a developer does not only make functional choices, but also choices that have a fundamental ethical impact. And we have to acknowledge this in education. A very concrete solution is to make courses on tech ethics mandatory for future engineers and computer scientists, just as courses medical ethics are mandatory for future medical doctors. And finally, education, of course, is also really important for critical thinking. For instance, a lot of companies use the word AI as a buzzword, whereas in practice, the technologies do not contain AI. So we really need to have this critical mindset, also to think critically of data sets and also the meaning of ethics. Thank you.
Thank you. Now back to France. We have Christine Aignan, who's member of the French Parliament, but also member of the French and German Joint AI Working Group. So from France, what's your perspective on all of this?
Thank you to give me the floor and to invite me to this summit today. First of all, I want to stress the importance to act and draw rules at European level and to coordinate this with all our national policy. Europe has talent and Europe must be ahead of all technologies. As it was already said, education is key. Even if we have talent, we know that we need more doctors, we need more engineers, and also especially in France, because I follow this very carefully, we need to have young people involved in science, men and women, because this is also key if we want AI to be fair and to consider the whole world and being sure that we do not introduce bias in these technologies. From a national point of view, European law have been developed in a fair way. It's growing. If we take the example of the GDPR, I think there is really a breakthrough in the way this has been considered, stopping as being in some way naive with what happened with China and the US, by also starting to draw some extraterritorial clause. Ethics is important. As I said, we need to make sure that we can, of course, put some limits, making sure that we have trust from all the people, otherwise these new technologies will not develop. Another topic that I want to stress also, and it was said that these technologies are multidisciplinary. It means that you do not work on AI as a whole, but in an isolated way, but because you apply it to health, you apply it to transportation. And if we want this to be effective, we need also to look at the regulation as a whole. You cannot only draw laws for AI, but what does it mean when you look at the health sector? What does it mean when you look at transportation? And sometimes we have barriers between European nations just because we have laws that are too complicated. So if we want this to be developed, we really need a global look at our regulation. There is currently an effort in Europe to draw some business European codes and make sure that we have a better flow of all this legislation between European countries. And this, I'm sure, will benefit also to all these new technologies. We have also stressed a little bit the point of how to finance this, and the same. There are discussions at the European level on the capital single market, and if we want really all our startups, all our innovators to look first at the European market and not necessarily going first to US, we really need this market to become global and stopping making things too complicated for them. There are currently a new project that can help develop all the exchange of data. I'm thinking about GaiaX. This must be encouraged because, of course, if we want to develop AI, we also need this pool of data to be open and with some rules, of course, but to a large extent to scientists and company. And of course, I will also finish on this. And I said it already, trust is probably the most important topic. We want all the European people to be sure that this technology will help them to live in a better world, and it has to be explained to a large extent to all of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Eva Kaili, hi. So you're a member of the European Parliament in the Industry Committee. You're from the SND, and you're chair of the Center for Artificial Intelligence. So what's your perspective?
Well, actually, for everything I just heard, I will have to add the European perspective. We have upcoming legislation and industrial strategy. We do have the artificial intelligence ethical framework, and we have a data strategy on the way. These were the shortcomings of EU to create actually a real digital single market so that we can benefit from access to data that they follow the same standards. And I will give you an example, since basically you talked about the main concerns. ECDC, the Center for Prevention and Control of Diseases, during the pandemic, they managed to have access to 80% of the data available from every member state and European hospital. So immediately they had access to those data. But those data, they were not following the same standards. This meant that they couldn't actually use them. They had first to find how much value existed there and to prepare data sets for scientists to use. So you understand that if we don't have common standards and global standards, so the Center for AI is working to collaborate with OECD, IEEE, large organizations like ILO in order to create a toolbox for these standards and also to expand the influence and the impact that European fundamental rights and values have. We saw that with GDPR. So this is how we have to start in order to fuel artificial intelligence and to help to give access to innovative SMEs to be able to have scale-ups that will manage to excel in EU. And for this reason, because I heard national strategies and the outlines and the aims, I'm more into how we can collaborate together and instead of fragmenting even more the market by designing different strategies to collaborate even more. And I think on the white paper, you mentioned that in the beginning, Laura, we have a risk-based approach and sector-specific approach. I think this will help to be faster with the low-risk sectors, and we have more standards and high compliance with a higher risk. I think this will help a lot to find the direction that we want to have for AI. And of course, the data governance is really essential to achieve the standards and also to understand how we can collect them, use them, exchange them in an environment that my colleague said trustworthy. To have trustworthiness in Europe, citizens have to understand and feel that you are in charge of their data and your data cannot be leaked. You will not compromise their privacy to have safety. You can have both. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Malte Lohan, you're Director General of Archambault, Europe's technology industries. So what's your take on Europe's strategy?
Thank you, Laura. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, I think, at the minute now. Pleasure to be here today and to bring the perspective of Europe's technology industries. Orgalim represents sectors from mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, electronics, ICT, to metal technology. About 770,000 companies across Europe, about 1/3 of total industry in Europe. And you won't be surprised if I say that AI has been used in our industries for many years already. Just think about technology in industrial automation. Think about technology in making our energy grids smarter. Think about technology in automation of waste processing. All of these, of course, are not future, they are already reality. And so the discussion that we're having around the future AI strategy for us is not an abstract academic discussion, it is a very real discussion, and the outcomes of the decisions that are going to be made in the next weeks, months, are going to fundamentally affect our ability in our industries to make use of the potential of AI. I want to welcome one very important point in the Commission's white paper, which is the recognition that we have a clear European industrial leadership when it comes to embedding AI in manufacturing processes. We wholeheartedly agree with this. And we've had already also in the conversation this morning, you know, the point around Europe falling behind China and the US, and I think there is truth to this in some of the business to consumer environments, social media, e-commerce, and others. It is not the case for industrial processes and for embedded AI in manufacturing in particular. And we think this is in the future wave of growth that we will see in artificial intelligence. We're expecting 30–40% growth in the market over the next years. The industrial part, the B2B part, is going to be the core driver of growth. And Europe is uniquely positioned to seize that opportunity and to be part of this wave of artificial intelligence and the benefits that come, even though we might have been behind on the first wave. So 3 key points for the strategy as we see it, and I think also reflecting some of the points already. First, AI is not one thing. There's not one product or one application or one system which is AI. It is many, many different ones. And so we have to approach the policy also through that lens of understanding that AI is a lot of different things. To state the obvious, in the business to consumer context of facial recognition, we are tackling entirely different concerns to predictive maintenance in manufacturing. Second key point is I think we need to recognize that the concerns out there among the citizens are real and that they have to be reflected in the future policy approach. But that needs to be done in a very subtle way that understands also the reality of AI as it is today, not as we think it might be in 20 years. And that reflects the current state of regulation, which is already there. And so my third point, and to cut to the chase, we think it is premature today to talk about legislating for AI. I'm sure we will come back to this, and I have plenty more, of course, on this point to share, but I will stop there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have Dr. Natasha Mccarthy, Head of Policy for Data at the Royal Society. What's your take?
Hello, thank you all. Some really fantastic points made already, so I'd like to reiterate a lot of the things that were said. So I'm from the Royal Society, which is the UK's National Academy for Science, and what I really want to focus on is on some of the research challenges at the forefront of AI and how they relate to the white paper. So what I really like about the strategy is this sort of twin focus on excellence and trust. And research challenges in AI can really bring those two elements together. The Royal Society report on machine learning came out 3 years ago, and it set out a number of research challenges, which I think still stand now. Those research challenges were shaped by looking at questions at the forefront of AI technologies. but also looking at some of the responses of society to the way that machine learning can be applied in different settings. So this was based on some dialogue work and conversations we had with society about the areas of AI application that may cause more concern, that have greater risk, and where trust is more of a challenge. So, for example, if we take the area of explainable AI, you can look at an AI application area such as developing image recognition and image analysis for medical applications. That's clearly a technical challenge at the forefront of AI. But if we are to create a system that can look at medical images and make diagnosis, we need to be certain that that can apply in clinical settings. That means that we can consider that the doctors using that information can trust that it's accurate, and that patients can trust that it's accurate, and that they have confidence in the outcome of that work, especially if it's making decisions about potentially life-changing treatments. So I feel that an important thing in enacting the strategy is ensuring that the research at the forefront of AI brings together these issues of excellence and technology and trust. Explainability there is one area, using privacy-preserving machine learning and privacy-enhancing technologies around data is another, and ensuring bias in data is corrected is also a really important consideration. So if we focus on these research challenges, and in doing so we bring together these questions of trust and excellence, then I think that does give Europe a competitive edge in AI, because we're creating AI technologies that have a wider potential area of application and are more likely to be taken up more broadly. But what I'd really like to reiterate is these forefront research questions are, as people have said already, highly interdisciplinary. There's not one technical solution that makes all AI explainable, transparent, and therefore trustworthy, because that is different in different circumstances. It means different things to different people. So it needs a holistic understanding. So I would say that we shape our research challenges so that they address the questions of excellence and trust that are in the strategy. We do that by making sure there's collaboration between disciplines, there's collaboration internationally, and there's collaboration between academia and industry. And I think there's already a very good basis for this across Europe. We've already heard about the Ellis initiative that is really kind of bringing a grassroots set of collaborations across Europe. And I think that kind of activity really does enable Europe to be at the forefront of AI by addressing these complex research challenges.
Okay, thank you. Now we have Nicolas Mial, who's co-founder and president of the Future Society. What is your perspective?
Well, thanks a lot. I'll give you a perspective from a civil society-based global think and do tank, which mission really revolves around advancing the responsible adoption of AI for the benefit of humanity. So we have the privilege of working with a lot, if not most, of the international organizations involved in that processes, a lot with governments and with the private sector organizations. So we have a bit of a unique perspective. And to go straight to your question, I think that, yes, the fact that the national, or not national, the European AI strategy, and the fact that the European Commission and European Parliament are working on this is a reassuring news. It's a good news for Europe and for the world. When you compare this with the paralysis in the US because of the polarization of US Congress and beyond US society. And I think that Europe cannot do without an AI strategy, given how far behind it is. So for Europe to catch up, there needs to be a process by means of which policymakers and industry work together that is embodied and translated into a strategy. Also, because we need AI policy and we need AI regulation, because we know by now that as AI does not fall from the sky, but emerges from the digital industry, self-regulation won't cut it if we are to advance the trustworthy adoption of AI. What lies upon us is to try and build a set of smart cocktails of but also soft and hard regulatory mechanisms to align the interests of European consumers and European workers, for example. And Europe is doing it from a position of weakness, industrial weakness. And we are late. We need to catch up. And it's trying to do it from a position of weakness and pragmatism as well as ambition. And that's not easy to rely on. In so doing, I think that Europe needs to do more to try and master the art of the game of AI capitalism. And right now it's focusing a lot on mastering the rules of the game. How about mastering more the arts of the digital and AI capitalism? And to Matt's point, indeed, there are a lot of assets that the industrial base of Europe has and should leverage. And what we really need to focus on is trying to build the industries of tomorrow in manufacturing, in transportation, in healthcare. And it's really a kind of a conundrum where we need to see the rise and support the rise of new digital actors, which really master 21st century AI business models versus transforming existing actors. Europe is full of old industrial players. How do we enable these guys to transform and at the same time see the rise of alternative actors that are going to disrupt them and accept that competition, accept and foster that disruption? And when I look at the kind of areas that the AI strategy is trying to tackle, and speaking to Eva and Kristin's points, I think indeed that it should be a mix of a top-down approach. For example, working and advancing the unification of the European capital market, because we need to find ways to avoid doing the innovation, doing the capital risking, and then having our innovation scaled up across the Atlantic. We need to find ways through capitalistic firepower to keep this industrialization process on shore. And that's the same for the single digital market integration. That's a top-down effort, and I really think that most of the things done there are going in the right direction. But in parallel, we really need to nurture a bottom-up bubbling of digital champions, as I said, which really demonstrate mastery of the 21st century AI business models. So in a summary, I think that really what needs to be done is engineering a situation of creating a competitive race of AI that goes to the ethical top as opposed to the ethical bottom. And there are emerging initiatives that, in my view, go in the right direction. I'll give you two examples. Whatever we do to foster certification and auditing of AI solutions are the kind of things that can really help reconcile market and regulation and engineering a race to the ethical top. These are areas where Europe is good, is present, has a vibrant industry. And finally, I think that if we are going to create that long-term bet that GDPR initiated and that the AI strategy will continue, I think that we probably need to do more in Europe to subsidize all the investments, especially from SMEs, around ethics by design and around compliance. Because if we want them to compete on the global market and we don't find ways to smartly subsidize these costs and these investments, we are going to create a delay that is not going to be recoverable because of the huge financial market power that the US and Chinese American giants have, knowing that US actors are heavily present already in the European market, not so much the Chinese yet, but so how do we create these conditions involves industrial policy. And final point, I think we need to invest a lot in strategic partnerships with the markets of tomorrow in our neighborhood, particularly with Africa. There is an immense room for strategic Euro-African partnership on AI investment, AI talent, AI research, and AI industry.
Thank you. And now, we have Professor Philipp Slusalek, who's scientific director at the German Research Center for AI. So from a research perspective, how do you perceive Europe's AI plans?
Yes, hello. Hello from beautiful Saarland here at the German-French border. And I want to build on some of Nicola's points here, but also coming back to your original question. The EU strategy definitely will help. I would argue it's essential, but we need to implement it, and urgently and quickly. We're on the way to do that, but I think we could do more. The high-level group of which I was a member and the CLARE Association of which I co-founded have strongly contributed to this EU strategy. CLARE is now the largest AI association worldwide, with a European focus, a grassroots organization with over 380 AI labs from across Europe, almost 4,000 supporters. We focus on the excellence in all of AI, not just machine learning. It's really the combination of techniques that we need to go forward. We need that AI from and for all of Europe and beyond with a human-centered focus. In the following, I want to focus on regulation because that is the topic here, or at least part of it. And it's obviously needed for certain parts of AI, and certainly for the life-threatening part, but also wherever it is about non-discrimination and many other aspects. It's really like requiring seatbelts, right? They were controversial when they were introduced, but they protect people, and we need to do the same thing for AI where this is necessary and to the degree it is necessary. But regulation, any regulation, has two aspects. There are the rules that we need to follow, that we impose, but there are also the methods to enforce the rules. Without that, the rules don't make any sense. And I'm most concerned about these methods because they need to be implemented. We don't really have them. For example, we can easily fool the deep learning system with a few colored patches to interpret a stop sign for something else. So what we need is a novel approach to AI, which we at DFKI call trusted AI. Not just trustworthy, really AI that we can trust deeply because of the methods that are behind this. We need to develop methods that provide guarantees about AI system. We don't have them yet. This would allow us to certify the properties of AI system, not just algorithm, but really the system that gets implemented in its context. And this is something that industry, big and small, urgently needs, and it is asking for. So what I'd like to propose here is a large joint initiative to develop what I call trusted AI made in Europe. Right? This is something that Europe stands for. Quality is at the corner of European products, and it should also be that for AI. And I believe this is a huge chance to have huge impact for business, for science, and society worldwide. Such a big mission would involve research, industry, societal players, and many others. And it would be an excellent first element for the AI Lighthouse Center that the Commission proposed in its white paper, and which Claire, from its beginning 2.5 years ago, has as its idea. I also sometimes call this the CERN for AI. So, of course, this requires significant research, but in an area where Europe is already leading, and where we've brought together now this big community through Claire. We have 4 excellence research networks which just started to operate this month. 3 of them are strongly based on Claire, and Claire is coordinating all of the 4 networks. And we now have the resources, we have the people, we have the network to address this together, as well as other challenges. So I think we really can make a big difference here and define parts of AI where Europe is definitely leading and where we can use this to influence many other areas. But in addition, and finally, we also need more discussions about regulation, about AI, and we need to jointly define the first part of this. We need to define the rules, what we as a society believe AI systems can and should not do. This is an important discussion, and it's really the combination of research and society and industry that needs to have that together.
Thank you. Last but not least, we have Lucila Cioli, who's Director in charge of AI and Industrial Strategy at the European Commission's DG Connect. So all eyes are on you, because you will be part of the team that will draft the future AI rules expected for next year. So perhaps you can tell us a bit more about what you have in store? Oh, no. We cannot hear you, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me now?
Can you
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So thank you very much for inviting me here today. As you know, we are working and we are reflecting and discussing possible rules for artificial intelligence, but of course what you are aware of and what is in the public domain is the white paper, and I want to start from the fact that the white paper is not only about rules for trustworthy AI, but it is also very much about our capability in the European Union to put in place programs that actually support developments in AI in the European Union. And so I just want to strengthen the point made by Dr. Mccarthy earlier, that it's very important to notice that we want to provide excellence in research, in testing experimentation facilities, in helping SMEs to adopt AI, in skills, but also and this is strictly linked to our wish for an environment where AI is trustworthy and human-centric, and where citizens can really embrace a trustworthy artificial intelligence. So the regulatory framework in reality is very much linked to the framework of excellence that we are proposing in the same white paper. And I like the two always to be remembered together and jointly. The information I can give you that goes on top of what you already know about the white paper, which is obviously in the public domain. It's the fact that we ran a public consultation on the white paper, and we have some interesting results. First of all, that about 3/4 of the respondents of the public consultation, and let me say that this public consultation on the AI white paper was very popular. It got many replies relative to other public consultations that taken place by the European Commission. And 3/4 of the respondents felt that the legislation had some gaps or the new legislation is needed. There was support to the idea of targeting, in particular, high-risk applications. So we are not interested in creating rules that apply as a blanket to all possible artificial intelligence applications, but we are very much interested in focusing on high risk. And this idea was widely supported. We also have proposed the idea of a voluntary labeling scheme that could be useful for low-risk applications, in particular for those companies that maybe are interested in getting some reputation from being able to label trustworthy AI. And this idea also received significant support. On biometric remote identification, 3/4 of respondents felt that there is a need for some kind of restriction, either a ban or a moratorium, or simply more restrictions that we have nowadays. And so I think this is an important point to note. And finally, the majority of respondents found that we need to revise our liability rules, the Product Liability Directive, but also we should be thinking on of the national liability rules that should be adopted for AI applications. So this is in a nutshell the results of the public consultation. Of course, with the public consultation, we reach a certain amount of people, which is maybe not representative of the European Union, but as I said earlier, we had an outstanding number compared to an average consultation. And we have continued, and we will continue discussing with stakeholders. There is another Alliance event coming up on the 9th of October, but certain events, also like this one, at the time of COVID and relative lockdown, are very, very useful for us also to be able to reach out and listen as much as possible to the stakeholders. So thank you very much again for organizing the event.
Well, thank you to all of you. So from what you said, there are some common trends that you've all pointed out, like trust, education, access to data, coordination with member states, and overall the fact that Europe might be late already. So before some of you already touched upon that, but before we go into some specific categories of challenges, what is the right balance between hard rules, including for data sharing, for example, but also for privacy, etc., and non-binding principles? I don't know, Eva Kaili, do you want to take a...
So basically, I think we distinguish ourselves from other players globally just because we are a bit late, but I think it's better late than sorry, because we need to follow rules for the high-risk sectors, exactly because we don't want to compromise the respect to fundamental rights and human rights, translating them into the digital era. So I wouldn't say we are late. I would say we are more cautious. I'm not sure if anybody wants to see here a Netflix movie of social ranking, excluding citizens from their insurance companies, or to their access for loans, and even from public transportation. So if we want to avoid that, first we have to clarify the rules. We have the problem of a fragmented market still, so we need to move very fast into achieving a digital single market. Lucila and her team, they are so knowledgeable that I believe we are in very good hands, and we wait to receive the final draft and work with amendments on those. So if we have the basis and the legal certainty to achieve the data exchange, a harmonized market, and if we decide to invest in Excel and excellence through digital innovation hubs, I think the last thing we should do, and Nicholas mentioned that, it's to decide our strategic partnerships with Africa, with the Gulf countries, even with China. But there has to be, besides the technical certainty, legal and political understanding that we accept and respect the same rules. So we have to be, I think, quite careful with the challenges that we can face, and I think we should strengthen our collaboration with democracies. We saw what could happen with Cambridge Analytica, so we have to decide that we don't want to put under any risk what we have achieved so far. So if I could say something, is that it is a globalized world, but we are in a very strong position since we're harmonizing a huge market and a very strong industry to get it right from the beginning, and also to make the right definitions, common definitions, in order to move forward to the future. I don't even know how many politicians can define what artificial intelligence is. So besides the fact that it's an algorithm that needs good quality of data, you can use it to solve problems, you can use it to make decisions and automate decisions. Do we want that? We said we want a human-centric AI. And should we embed it in hardware? It's a software. Should we embed it in hardware and allow to not have human control? So if we decide on those things, I think we can actually lead and avoid to risk the safety of people and of our communities. Thank you.
Malti Lohan, you said earlier it was premature to have legislation on AI. Would you care to elaborate a bit?
Thanks, Laura. And maybe it's also a chance to pick up on the question you were asking around what's the right approach. Let me start again by the conviction that there is an opportunity for Europe to be major beneficiaries of the next wave of artificial intelligence. And we see this as part of our next contribution to our competitiveness, to our resilience in Europe. We've talked about this a lot in the context of the crisis, and also in the context of the green and the digital transitions that we all know are important. And the investments coming from the recovery package are going to be driving a lot of this transformation, including in terms of the role of different applications of AI. Now, we know that in terms of investment into AI, we are not where we want to be. And if you look at the sort of previous 5 years, about 2/3 of the investments, public and private, into AI come from China. About 1/3 come from the US. Europe is in the very low single digits. So we know that we have not been where we want to be. The Commission in 2018 already said we need to get to an annual investment of around 20 billion, which is, I think, a solid ambition to have, but we are, of course, not there yet. And with Horizon Europe, we've started sort of taking steps in that direction. The Digital Europe program in the new budget now, who knows where it's going to end up, but it will not get us far enough. So we will continue to need private investments to cover a big part of this ambition. Now, how do we get private investments to start flowing where they haven't in the past? This is where the link to regulation comes back, because investments take place when there is certainty. And legal certainty is a big part of that. You need to have the confidence in a kind of time horizon. In our industries, capital goods industries, investment cycles are 5, 10 years or more. You need to have a certainty that is more than 6 or 12 months. And for that reason, to unlock the investments, to drive this future wave of benefits coming from AI, the legal certainty point is really critical. And we have to recognize, I of course listened very carefully to the different comments, we're not starting in a vacuum. There's already plenty of legislation that covers artificial intelligence in the internal markets, which plays a very important role already today. And we've looked at that very carefully and concluded, as far as we can tell, this does the job. Now, I know the conversation will continue. Where do we need to really fix specific problems? But let's be precise about those. And let's not sort of start with an assumption that we are starting from zero. There is a very solid, very comprehensive legislative framework already in place, which achieves a lot of the ambitions that were described by different panelists.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience that kind of echoes what we said about what you said about coordination earlier. I think it's a question for you, Christine Aignan, from Georges Rebender, who asks if you could tell us more about the cultural benefits and synergies from the French-German AI cooperation. We cannot hear you.
Yes, I had to unmute. Sorry for that. Yes, thank you for this question. As you know, President Macron has been very influential in pushing the AI strategy in France, starting from the beginning of his mandate in 2018. And we have been trying to be closer from Germany on many subjects. And one is research and AI, as it was signed in the new Treaty of Aachen that was signed 2 years ago. And this treaty is also creating a very new tools and instruments. This is the French and German Assembly with 50 deputies from Germany and 50 from France. And we are supposed to check and control the content of this treaty. And that's why we decided to create this group to make sure that both countries, of course, being enclosed in all this European policy and making sure that all this is coordinating and participating to the European roadmap on this topic. You are pointing all the cultural difference that may happen, that may occur between the French and the German. Well, that's, I think, one of the benefits of this assembly is that with regular meeting, of course, with the COVID situation, we could not do it as much as we wanted, but we can, little by little, know each other better and make sure that we understand the same behind this concept. As it was said during this roundtable, we need also to define what is AI, and behind this definition, there are also some cultural differences.
And Lucila,
I don't know if I answered exactly to your question. I hope so.
Thank you. Lucila Cioli, so different countries have come up with different AI strategies. How do you work with them for coordination?
We have a group of member states that we meet regularly. We have a formal group called the Artificial Intelligence and Digitizing European Industry Group of Director Generals from the member states, and they meet regularly and they discuss in particular the coordinated plan. This is a plan that we have developed together to make sure that investments in AI in the different member states is strategic and addresses the same priorities, so that we don't have duplication of effort, and we're trying really to exploit the synergies as much as possible. A revision of this plan will be published at the beginning of next year. So I think the point was made by Eva earlier very clearly that we really need to have member states to work together in this area. And also when we talk about a regulatory framework on AI, we very much want to strengthen the single market from this point of view, and would not want to see all sorts of different initiatives popping up in different countries, because that would be very difficult for the developers of AI.
Okay. And Clayton Bartolo, since Malta is a leader in its AI strategy, how did you work with other countries? How do you see this?
Actually, as a country, we were the first moving out to have the first mover advantage. So on that aspect, we decided to take the leap. And rather than thinking whether we were premature or whether we were too far ahead, we decided to be first and be a leading country where AI is concerned. Having said that, we have also participated in the white paper consultation, which was issued by the European Union, so that we will ensure that we are also in line with the European values which are being transcribed through this white paper. So in this regard, we are looking once again at being leaders, both in AI, but also in other digital areas, where we are looking at enhancing Malta as a digital society with the aim of taking full advantage of all that digitization and digitalization of our economy has to offer. We are looking to reap the full benefit and opportunities which being digital can offer us as a small country, where we have also shown how resilient the digital economy aspect can be. And so we are looking to enhance our economic diversification and create more opportunities, most of all employment opportunities for the younger up and coming generation, so that they can grasp what is there to be offered. However, in order to do this, we are looking at upskilling and also reskilling our workforce. So we do believe that the future lies in education, and education is being given a very important role also in the new digital strategy which is being devised for Malta, and which strategy will be launched later on during the year. So as a country, while we are, yes, I do believe that we are ahead of the curve where AI is concerned. However, we are also looking at all the other opportunities which the digital aspect can offer us. Notably, I also heard about cloud, for example, during the summit, where yes, there are a number of advantages which can be sought when one works with cloud. We are looking also at efficiency and also environmental protection through the digital aspect, all of which then come together in our vision for a holistic digital future for Malta.
Okay, thank you. We only have 7 minutes left, and I would like to hear another second time from all of you who didn't speak twice. So very quickly, another thing that was mentioned several times is trust and is also ethics. So Europe is trying to make values a competitive advantage also in its AI. So Dr. Kathleen Gabriels, do you think that how ethics could play a role in making Europe's AI trustworthy or within a competitive advantage?
Well, first of all, ethics by design, as I've already mentioned, so improve the technologies. It's also part of the GDPR, privacy-enhancing technologies. So that is an important aspect. What is also important is, so you mentioned non-binding rules. I think you should have clear repercussions when someone breaks a legal boundary. So you should have clear consequences when this happens. So an ethical code is just too light. Having said that, I think, again, education is very important to increase awareness, also on a societal level. For instance, when you look back at the past 3 decades, we have made major improvements on a number of levels. Think, for instance, about environmental awareness, or even longer than 3 decades, women's rights, or the way we are dealing with waste. So we have made a lot of improvements, and we have been increasing our awareness in ethics on numerous domains. So I think with AI, and well, this is not a positive example, but we've had many examples. Cambridge Analytica has already been mentioned, and actually that's a really good starting point for discussions in the classroom. Like, who do you think is responsible? Is only the CEO responsible? Is an employee, a data scientist responsible as well? And this opens the floor for discussions in order to, once again, try to focus on critical mindsets. So yes, education is important, and technology, so ethical design and these collaborations are key as well.
Okay. Nicolas Miail, I know you have some thoughts about values and ethics.
Yeah, sure. I think that ethics cannot and will not exist in a vacuum. It doesn't work. So we really need to go beyond the mystification of values and render them effective on the ground by inventing the best practices that go along with it. Let me give you an example. I think that one of the great assets for the AI economy of the GDPR is naturally this concept of data portability, which has the potential to rebalance the asymmetries of power between big corporations, which drive network effects and hyper return to scale and therefore aggregate data, and smaller players, which are more innovative, especially in Europe. So portability is there to rebalance that. So we can, ensure that this value, we can express the need or the will for this value to exist. But if we don't put right next to it the industrial processes, the regulatory approaches to render them manifest, it's going to be difficult. And it takes time. I know it's difficult, but it's very important to invent, for example, the API business model, API economy, API regulation to ensure that in practice, this happens. And I worry a little bit when we talk only about the values without all the details to implement them. And the other point I want to make very quickly is that, well, if we want to talk about democracy and AI in the age of democracy, then let's take democracy seriously. AI is a story of aggregation of power and wealth at the top and at the center. Europe is a federation. And so how do we ensure, through the rise of AI, that the separation of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary branches continues? And how do we ensure that the separation of power, the subsidiarity principle? I understand what Lucila says, that she worries when she sees too many, when the European Commission sees too many local and national initiatives happening, because indeed it can fragment the integrated digital single market that we need. It's very important. And at the same time, how do we enable pluralism? How do we enable the fact of having different regions following different paths? It's the core of the notion of difference, that is, and plurality that lies at the center of a union.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 minutes left, and I would like to hear from 4 speakers. So you will please have to be very quick on one last question. Is the first step to ensure that the single market is no longer fragmented, to make sure that SMEs can scale up? Eline Chivot, you have 40 seconds.
All right, yeah, this is definitely a priority. We still don't have that large consumer domestic market. So we still have diverging IP rules, licensing agreement diverging, difficulty to deliver goods. So that should definitely be a priority, as well as the lack of financing of an existing innovation. And also we have a lack of VC investment. We tend to embrace the precautionary principle. We want to regulate to create more trust and uptake. But this is not necessarily through more regulation that you will achieve that. So we need to be very careful. And I think I'll just leave it to that so we have enough time for everybody else.
And Cedric Archambault, what's the perspective from a large company about fragmentation in the single market?
So I think when we think about Europe, we don't think about the different it's a good thing, like not having fragmentation is a very good thing. And we think about, so the boundaries are very artificial, and when you think about like companies that offer like cloud services like Amazon, well, you decide as a customer where you want to put your data, where you want to run your algorithms, and there is no reason to create like artificial boundaries. So this is really creating inefficiencies and preventing, I think innovation, preventing like small companies to develop solutions that they can use in a broader like set of, in the EU and across countries. And so I think it's something that we should carefully think about, and I agree with many of the points raised before on that point.
Dr. Natasha Mccarthy, any thoughts on, is there also fragmentation in research, lack of cooperation and lack of communication between different countries?
Well, we absolutely feel that collaboration in research is important. And we've said many times at the Royal Society that the UK should seek to have the strongest possible association with Horizon Europe. Collaboration is essential. It enables people to work together. It enables researchers to share the infrastructure, the computing power that we've all heard today is essential to make sure that AI advances. So collaboration and continuing to work together are absolutely central across Europe.
And Professor Philips Rosalek, the last words are for you.
Great. Yeah, fragmentation has been a huge problem in European AI. With Claire and other initiatives, I think we've addressed this to a large part. And we see more and more collaboration across national borders. I mean, German-French collaboration was mentioned already. DFKI and INRIA signed actually at the first anniversary of the Aachen Treaty collaboration agreement. There's projects over 5 million already in place. And Trusted AI, which I mentioned before, turns actually out there are initiatives of both sides that are very similar. And so I think there's a great alignment that's happening here. And what I hope is that we can build on top of that, enlarge it, and also make this not just a German or a French or a German-French thing, but really broaden this to a larger European initiative. And also have this large mission in the sense of a European lighthouse, because that is something that I think could underlie European AI going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all 11 of you for this conversation today. I would like to invite Nicolas Vinocourt back on the stage, who will explain what's next.
And it so happens I'm right here. Thank you, everybody, for following the discussions this morning. Right now, we're going to go into a 30-minute lunch break where we invite you to keep the discussion going in a chat rooms we have on the app. One is on AI and ethics, always important. Other one is on AI for good, and the third one is on AI implementation. You'll have the chance to exchange with anybody else who is involved in this summit. And the places are limited, so we encourage you to go in now. And our next discussion session begins at 1:15 on how to overcome AI biases. Always an interesting subject. Stay tuned. See you then. Thank you.